Hello, everyone. I'm Paulami Das. I'm the founder of the Museum Memories project, which some of you are aware of. It is an oral history documentation project that I started in 2020 April at the beginning of the COVID global lockdown. It collects memories of museum visitors from anywhere in the world. So please look up our website, themumeproject.com, our Instagram page, and our YouTube channel where this next video will be uploaded. We started something called MuMe Matters. MuMe is the short form of Museum Memories project, in which we are talking to museum professionals, architects, artists, designers, and others connected with the cultural heritage sector, that what is the importance of cultural heritage. Do we need museums? Have the meaning and the relevance of museums been changed? Um, there is global, movement due to natural and man-made disasters, and how does the human being, the individual, then connect to heritage, connect to the past? And I've been especially concerned about, do we actually need museums? Is museum a physical space that we go to, or is it beyond boundaries, like this project of ours? Uh, we are talking today to Jane Borges, and a very highly acclaimed award winning journalist and author. She has started archiving the oral history, the stories of her community in Mumbai, most of which is actually disappearing. Um Also, we'll be talking to Chirodeep Chaudhuri, photographer, author, educator, and they both are very much there on Instagram, so do follow them. We are asking them the need and the importance of archiving. Do we need archives? Why do we need archives? Has it become more important to archive, to save and preserve people's stories from the people themselves? And what are the layers and narratives, the technology, the rigor, the discipline that archiving needs? Or is it just that, you have a mobile camera and you can start talking to anyone and then record their story? So, is there a methodology to it? So, thank you for joining us, and we hope you enjoy this episode of MuMe Matters. Do follow, like, and subscribe our YouTube channel, the Museum Memories Project. Thank you. So, good evening, everyone. Let me introduce you to Jane Borges and Chirodeep Chaudhuri. Jane is a very popular person in Mumbai. She's a very renowned journalist, award-winning journalist, and she's an author, and she also teaches, and she also takes people for these fantastic walks that I am yet to get onto. She's an oral historian. She has done a lot of work in archiving and documenting stories of different peoples of Mumbai who have lived and contributed and made the city as we know it today. And Chirodeep is a photographer, he's an author, and he's also a photojournalist in a way, and he also teaches. And as I've already mentioned, his you can follow him and Jane both on Instagram. But also, let's hear about archiving and documentation and the importance of oral history and the histories of people from the people themselves. So, Jane, we'll ask you first. Please make the audience who are here about aware about your work.
Okay. Thank you so much for having me here. And I am a big fan of yours and Chiro's work, and been lucky to meet the two of you through my work as a journalist. So I will begin by saying that I'm actually a journalist, and by profession worked as a journalist for close to 2 decades now. And otherwise, I write fiction when I'm not. Doing articles for a newspaper, and on the side I do have a passion project which is called Soboykar, and it's a project which involves documentation of stories of people from vanishing Catholic neighborhoods in the south of Bombay. Now, Soboykar comes from two root words, which is Bomoykar. Bomoykar is the word that a lot of people from the Konkan region, they call them, and who live in Mumbai, they used to call themselves Bomoykars. That's a very Konkani way of saying I'm from Bombay. And Sobo is the geography that I have restricted my oral archiving project, which is South Mumbai. So the project has come from this, which is Soboykar. And I've been working on this for the last 5 years. Obviously, through my work, I've met a lot of. So I'm not a trained oral historian. I'm someone who's working on the job. I sometimes feel that it's just a too strong a word to use, but it is part of my the work I do now, because I'm not professionally trained. I have been learning over the course of, say, these many years of having started this project. But what I was saying is, while I was working as a journalist, I realized that a lot of the stories that I was witnessing and seeing, and the changes that I was seeing in the city, um, those were things that I could not bring into my journalism, because journalism is usually bound by principles of, if you have to talk about it from a very, very theoretical point of view, it's bound by principles of newsworthiness. A story is newsworthy when it's happening in the present. There is it has a large scale consequences and impact, and it's obviously timely. It is bound by that 24-hour news cycle, which is now even shrinking further because of social media. So a lot of those stories I wasn't able to tell, like things that I was seeing with my own eyes, which was a slow. And I write fiction, and I write fiction about um, my first fiction book was Bombay Balcha, which was about my neighborhood, my Catholic neighborhood where I come from, and I had and it's called Kavel, which is again in the south of Mumbai, once a thriving Christian neighborhood, and today gentrified, very different from what it used to be and what we read about it in the city's history books. Um, so I realized that this was happening to many spaces, many neighboring spaces, like Christian neighboring spaces, neighborhood spaces in Mumbai. Same thing with other communities as well. But how was I going to put it in my journalism? With an article, two articles, I really don't know if that will do justice to the work, which is why I started finding ways to tell these stories. And that's when I came in touch with Malvika Bhatia, who runs Citizens Archive of India. And again, I came to her through my work, and she really, kind of handheld me into my oral history journey. And I started Soboykar. We interview people who have lived in these neighborhoods at some point in time, or who continue to live there, and through their stories of how they came here, which is, we're basically trying to study the stories of migration, how migration changes a city and the neighborhood. And in this one specifically, people who Catholics who come from the Konkan. So we've very, very we've narrowed down the demography of the subject that we are interviewing. And we try to understand from them their stories of how their forefathers came to Mumbai, made Bombay their home, settled here, and why they at some point chose to migrate. And through their voices, we are trying to understand the ways in which neighborhoods in Bombay change. And so that is in short really the project. We, apart from oral interviews that can go, they're full length interviews about a person's life journey, so they can go on for hours, and we do it over several sessions. We also gather material memory, so we scan any kind of photographic evidence, or basically images that they can supply, that have any connection to the neighborhood and their lives, as a community in the spaces that they inhabited. We also do take photographs of objects, because that's part of material memory gathering. Again, anything that links us to the work that the stories we're trying to archive.
So, how many generations has your family been in Bombay, Mumbai?
So I am a third generation from Mumbaikar. My grandfather came here. Both my grandfathers, actually, paternal and maternal grandparents, were the first to come here. My father's side, my paternal grandfather came from North Canada, which is today Karwar, North Karnataka, and my maternal grandfather came from South Canada. And then I have my paternal grandmother comes from North Goa. So we are, really from all parts of the Konkan region, and I think ours is a typical case of understanding how migration happens. And after 5 years of doing this project, it's only now that I'm interviewing my parents, and I'm discovering that, because I'm interviewing them as part of the project, really, and I'm understanding my own family's history and things that they had never told me.
Yeah.
They are now surfacing. So ours is a typical migration story, really, because my grandparents came here for better for better livelihood opportunity. They got married here, and then they had, this they started very small, living in the chawls. That is how most of Mumbai resided, say, in the early 20th century, and then moving, and their families moved into larger homes. And then my grandfather was the first one to really, from Bombay, he moved to Muscat to work. Then he took my father to work there, and then we grew up in Oman, and we came back to Bombay, and then I again went and worked in Muscat. So we have this migration story, and we could have easily left Bombay, and we could have been part of this community that constantly is moving, but we chose to remain in Bombay. But a lot of these, the reason why I'm doing this archive today is, or trying to ensure that we preserve these stories, is because the community is now fast migrating and moving outside of India, or even to the suburbs of Bombay. So these Christian neighborhoods which had a predominantly a strong Christian identity, no longer has that Christian identity. Like places like where I come from, Kavel, they said that the origin of the word Kavel is probably a chapel, because there used to be an old chapel here, or from police who resided here, and but chapel is the closest kind of connection to Kavel. And today Kavel is not Kavel, because like we are just like you can count them to less than 50, the Christians, so down from thousands to 50, right? Similarly, Sonapur, which is another Christian neighborhood, used to be the former graveyard or cemetery of the residents of Kavel. And that is why the word Sonapur, so the land of the dead or the asleep. And so Sonapur is no longer Sonapur, because it is now a proper thriving neighborhood, and with a very small Christian population. So all of these things, kind of, to understand how how city spaces are changing. I wanted to do it from a place of from somewhere I could understand best. So I started with this. I hopefully want to expand my project, not so boycott, but to do different kinds of projects where we can document different stories. And Chirodeep and I have been thinking about it forever, and we've not gotten around, because I think even I'm very busy. But I think there are ways in which we can archive different kinds of stories in our city, and there is a need to do it, and on a very urgent basis. I think Chirodeep is a classic example. He sees the city transforming because he captures it on his camera, so he knows how it is. So maybe you can ask him.
So Chirodeep, you are also a few generations in the city, and you stay in Thane, which is like a suburb. So so you were always in Thane? How was it?
No, but the thing is, I would at one point keep joking and saying, like, I'm a migrant son as well, and the joke really came from a time when the migrants. I mean, in Bombay there was a lot of politics around migrants, right? I mean, at one point it was the South Indians, then it became the people from Bihar and UP, and then it became Bangladeshis more recently. And I mean, it was a peculiar thing, because this is a city that was built by migrants, and so I mean, we kind of think of migrants as a certain kind of people. You know what I mean? Uh, if so when I would tell people like I'm a migrant son, they would kind of be a little shocked. Well, the point is that my father moved to Bombay, I think in 1968 or something like that. And work brought him here, right? So he came here, and along with him, there were a lot of young single Bengali young men who kind of found themselves in Bombay then, and so we were living in Chembur, and from there, then we had moved to Mazgaon, and from Mazgaon, then in 2000, I moved to Thane. So since then, I've been here. So basically, all my life, I've lived uh, in Bombay.
Hmm.
And for the last for about little over 30 years is when I've been photographing Bombay. So yeah.
But like amongst all the professions, did you choose photography? And what, like, Jane came to documenting because of her work, that she's primarily a journalist. So you were with Time Out for a long time. And your photographs of the average commuter in a local train, not necessarily in an AC compartment, or the homes of people, and again an average person, not those fascinating art deco and this building and that building, and their doorways, the things they leave behind. And of course the recent work that you've been doing on the bridges, not recent, it's over the few decades. What made you sort of gravitate towards it? What pulled you
uh,
and keeps you
you
there?
the thing is, my trajectory in photography actually has been uh, I mean, at the risk of sounding self-congratulatory, it's been fairly diverse in the sense that it started uh, in a newspaper, which required, newspapers were about local news, right?
Right.
Of course, I traveled to other parts of the country, but we were focusing on Bombay. It required me to kind of walk around the city, look, and things like that. I think very early in my career, probably like I think a year and a half into it, I started feeling a little bored with what I was doing, and which actually led to a project which is still going on, where I started photographing public clocks in Bombay, buildings that
Yes,
had clocks,
yes.
and which is when I came in contact with Sharda Dwivedi, and I think Sharda, for me, and I think for a whole generation of us,
Mm.
uh, I think was a very influential person who kind of made us fall in love with this city. You know, though so I was working on projects in the early part of my career, which was about photographing the architectural heritage of Bombay and
Hmm.
things like that. But I think, there was another project which my friend Samira Khan, the journalist Samira Khan, and I had been commissioned by Sharda to do. That book never happened, but it was to photograph the Muslim neighborhoods of Bombay, which was from Crawford Market, going right down up to Baikala, up to up to the JJ Hospital Junction. But we would sometimes wander off a little up north as well from there. Uh, you know, but I think, so the thing is, I was uh, beginning to do a lot of pho- uh, photography of architecture at that time, uh, where I suddenly found myself, over those years, kind of getting pigeonholed into a certain kind of photography, but I think what it also was doing was that through Sharda and through that first exhibition of the buildings with clocks, I think I came in contact with a whole range of people
Hmm.
who I found shared a similar uh, interest and love for the city. And I think what we discovered over the years, around 30 years since then, that I think all of our understanding of the city, and I mean, I think how we look at it, how we read it, uh, all of that has kind of had a transformation over the years. So I don't think I find myself not interested in, say, photographing architecture in the way that I was photographing earlier. I don't find myself being interested in that anymore. So for instance, something like, say, photographing Art Deco in the way that I was looking at it in the formative years of my career, I don't think that interests me anymore. My interest now has kind of moved, or it's, I would like to think, evolved in how I'm kind of reading the city and looking at the city. And I think this has happened, I mean, as I think any good education would be. I mean, I think from diverse reading, from you know uh, hanging out with people with kind of diverse interests in the city and things like that. So even the projects that I'm doing now, and I think, I mean, what it has also done is probably uh, added, I like to believe so, added a bit of nuance to the way that I'm reading the city now. And I think the projects that I've gone on to do later, uh, I I think kind of are a reflection of that, because I don't think if you were not a resident of Bombay, if you had not spent the kind of years that I've spent in Bombay, which is essentially a lived experience, uh, I don't think those works would have been possible. Uh, it's not about photographic skill or whatever that I'm talking about.
Hmm.
I'm talking about how do you make sense of you know uh, the subtle uh, clues that the city kind of is all the time throwing up, or that exist all around you in the city. Does that answer your question?
Yes, of course. So it's given
Yeah.
me a
Mm,
lot more questions.
mm,
So both of
mm,
you have been in and out of the city. You choose to be in Mumbai because you love Mumbai. And this, you have also written, I was reading on the bridges, that document of Chirodeep, that the smells, for you also, Jane, the cuisine of the community that you're documenting. So all these things, it's a very multisensorial experience for you. So there are narratives, there are layers and layers of narrative which you encounter in your work, and then you dig deeper and deeper, right? If I'm not mistaken, that's the whole process. I'm asking this question because I find a lot of people now using these hashtags, archiving and curation and research on social media without actually going deep into it. And when you go deep into something, it's not just the happy, pleasant, fun things. There are also very difficult realities one has to encounter, not just related to people. Like, Chiroti, when you're documenting bridges, parts of the city's landscape is drastically changing. And Jane, you were saying that, there were so many thousand people. Now there are hardly any left. So, I'll ask Jane first. In your work, how, because it's oral history, and you mentioned that you are not an oral historian. So, a lot of people need to understand that oral history, there's a proper technique behind recording, which is why she's emphasizing that, she's working with an organization that specializes in this. Is that taking a mobile or an expensive gadget and, pushing it in people's faces and asking them, oh, how are you living, is not oral history. I would like to emphasize that. So, Jane, when you are getting into these narratives, when people are telling you that their families don't live here any longer, or maybe the younger population is not there. Do you face a situation of like when it gets depressing or it gets sad, or do you think there are communities that are vanishing? Do you feel that in your work?
Yeah. So to answer your question, what I feel that what social media has done really has democratized the space of oral
Of
history, right?
course, of course.
I feel that whatever kind of work that is being done today, even with regards to mobile documentation or taking short videos, for instance, they all add value to the work of oral history, of course. Whether that can be seen holistically, perhaps not, but I do see that that is work of value. Sometimes when someone, say for instance, I'm taking a picture of my neighborhood, something I really love, and I think people who follow me may get bored, but I take pictures of my building every time it rains. The first showers, the first monsoon. There are certain typical images that I take, and I've been doing this consistently for about 6-7 years now, and I post it on social media. And then I have been myself, when there are days when I'm doing nothing, I go back to those images, say from 5 years ago, that same image of my building, for instance. I have been taking pictures of my building for the last 10 years. And every time I get, and I see the change in the building, right? And that is also oral history. So I think to kind of
Hmm.
put it in a very academic, yes, oral history requires rigor, but to just from an academic point of view, yes, rigor is involved, but then I wouldn't want to discount the work that others are also doing in small and big ways to tell the story. That is also oral history. Um, there is a little more effort that is required, and perhaps if they do so, maybe it will become a more a more grounded a project which is more layered and has more heft. Having said that, with the kind of work I do, and I'm training to be one, so I know that it is a process. It requires a lot of time and investment with your subject, because oral history is more so it goes beyond history books. It goes beyond academia.
Right.
It tells a story of the person, of the individual. So I feel that a lot of that is about spending time with the subject. Like, Chirodeep would spend time with photographing a subject, be it a building or a structure or a person. You do that with oral history as well. So you need that investment of time is required to flesh out the stories. Like just yesterday, my father was telling me the story of his childhood, and by the time an hour had passed, I was recording it on the camera and I was doing the interview. And he says, I want to share more. And I said, no, let's keep it at an hour, because I feel that if you continue doing this interview for the next 1 hour, there are lots of stories that you're going to forget, because even remembering can be exhausting.
Right.
So as an historian, I make sure that we give the subject time. We give ourselves time to think about these stories that our subject is sharing with us. So tomorrow, if I do this, now I do the second session with my dad, say 2-3 days from now, I'm sure he's going to remember things from his childhood that he completely forgot to share with me. So what oral history really, involves is patience and time with the subject. And I've been fortunate to have been given that time by the people people I've interviewed. They have given me that time, and for that time is very precious. I know people who are very, 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 very lackadaisical. They don't think too much of what my work is or what their stories are. I think one big problem I encounter is that people don't see any worth in their own life story, and that is the first question they ask me: is why do you want me to tell you my story? Because I don't think there is anything of worth. And as an oral historian, it is our job to help them find that why their story matters, and why it's not only matters in the smaller scheme of things, but in the larger scheme of things, which is the city. So I've been fortunate that way to have got that time from people. And with regard to the second part of your question, it can get very emotional at times, not only for the interviewer, but even for me, but for the interviewee, because they are remembering difficult things that um, they had completely forgotten or had not given too much thought about because of day to day life, right? Like my father yesterday, going back to my father broke down yesterday talking about the time when he was an infant and he spent 8 months in a hospital, and he was nearly declared dead, and he was an infant, and the kind of work and effort that his grandmother and his mother took to ensure that he comes out of that state. And it is something that he had probably not thought of because he is now 68, and this happened when he was not even, like, he was an infant, right? But it's about that you carry those feelings still after 60, 68 years, and that's what oral history does to you. It is generally very overwhelming for the person who's telling the story. This remembering can bring all kinds of feeling, right? Sadness, anger, happiness, and also a feeling of heavy sense of loss. So I think that is what we encounter, and that is what I encounter a lot when people talk about, say, their own families, their own grandmothers and mothers who are no longer here. They suddenly break down, and for that also you require time and patience, and to allow them to marinate in those feelings, because it is completely justified. And that loss also extends to the neighborhood that they occupy, the space that they kind of occupy, because they realize how much they have lost, and how much, what a beautiful time that they had, in the early years. The time that they took for granted, the time that we take for granted now in our cities, the cities that we occupy, we don't know how much of this is going to change, and how much is
Right.
that we're not going to have in the future, right? Just say for something, the pleasure of walking, I feel we are being denied that over a course of so many years, and slowly it's just going from our lives. Like, I grew up in Oman, in Muscat, where
Right.
people do not walk. People walk because they want to lose weight, perhaps, or for fitness. So you especially go to a garden, you'll go to a beach to walk, and that is where people walk. I remember when I went to work there briefly after 10 years in Bombay, and I used to go and step out, just to buy groceries. People would actually roll down their windows and look at me and say, "Why are you walking in broad daylight under the hot sun?" So these are things that I think will happen to Bombay as well, where our policy cares less for the pedestrian and more for motorists. So we're going to lose all of this, and just this freedom to walk may be something I feel we take for granted now. We may at some point, because of the way the city is transforming, that may change. So small things like that, I think oral history has the capacity to kind of bring those things to life. I hope I've answered your
So,
question.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, of course, of course. I mean, it never occurred to me that one day we might actually not be able to walk, might
Our
lose
cities, I'm
the
just thinking about,
pavements. Yeah.
yeah, I mean, for our cities, I'm thinking about Bombay, and,
No, no,
with,
it's actually, I mean, right now I'm in a two-tier city here also. I walk and people look at me like, why are you walking? I don't have a car or a two-wheeler, so they're very surprised. They think it's because I can't afford to buy one or I don't know how to drive. I'm like, no, it's neither, but I want to walk because that's a choice I'm making. Because again, going back to what Chaudhary had written and even you speak of, it's looking at the different trees and the seasons change. When you look at the different trees, the different flowers, and the character of the space you live in is important as a human being for us to connect with. And so I have a question, Jane. These buildings, these communities are living in, are they being replaced? Are they being broken down into big apartment complexes?
so redevelopment has taken on in a big way in Bombay as we know it today, and all these old buildings, because most Cavell is a very old Christian neighborhood.
Hmm.
Um, when I say Bombay's history actually goes back before the Portuguese, right? We
Right,
talk
right.
about post Portuguese, and after what happened when colonization happened, but we were colonized perhaps by by different communities before that. And I was reading this brilliant book by Meher Mirza on which is called Sea Salt and Sand. Am I right? No, Sea Salt and Spice. Sorry. And
Please show the book,
Chirodeep,
please.
yeah, Chirodeep's cover, by the way, a fabulous cover. This is
Wow.
Chiro's cover.
Oh, right. I've seen
Thank
the
Yeah,
you.
book.
yeah, yeah. So this is, I'm
Thank
promoting
you.
Meher and Chiro in the same breath. But so she talks about how, spaces like Bombay, for instance, had so many Hindu dynasties that ruled Bombay for Mumbai, the islands, as we know it. Sopara and Thane were at that time the main ports in Kalyan, Sopara, Nala Sopara, as we know it today. But these were ruled by several dynasties. Having said that, now say with Kavel, for instance, because it is a it was more like a colonial neighborhood, right? A neighborhood that emerged during the colonial era is what we think. But we've actually discovered coins from the Rashtrakuta dynasty in Kavel. But the buildings here had the typical, architecture, vernacular architecture that drew from, say, both the cities, changing architectural tradition as well as the British and the Portuguese. And those buildings have now disappeared. Most of the bungalows and villas, the last bungalow that I saw disappear was right in front of my eyes in 2005. And now we have like some 4 or 5 old buildings, and residents live in those buildings, and that's about it. And everything else has now is being replaced by towers and ugly glass buildings, and that's the story of the rest of Bombay. And many of these people who used to live in these houses prefer to move to the suburbs because they get bigger houses there. So, which is one of the reasons why people are migrating. They're migrating because of real estate, the real estate boom and gentrification of these neighborhoods. A lot of that is not, this gentrification is not planned. So it's very ill planned, poorly planned, which is why we are losing these spaces. But what was the question you asked? Sorry.
No, this is what you were saying.
Yeah.
This is exactly.
So I said,
it's actually
a lot of these spaces have disappeared. My building is about 120 years old, and I think that is the last few buildings that are there here are those buildings that are about 120, 130, 40 years old. And we've got our landlords have been kind enough to ensure that they repair these buildings every few years.
In continuation with what we were discussing with Jane, Chirodeep, you also have been documenting, right? Bridges, clocks, architecture, in continuation with that. A lot of buildings we know are vanishing. So what do you learn from these, I wouldn't say just projects, but your work? What are you getting to see?
Well, I think I don't know what I learned. I think what I think
Noticing, observing.
what one has been observing really is, how much the city is transforming. I don't, the thing is, I was just thinking the other day. I think when I first started photographing, the public clocks.
Right.
It wasn't a project that I was doing. It just started out as something else. I think I was too young in my career to think projects and all that. Nowadays I think photographers think in terms of projects. I don't think then we were. But anyway, the point is that, of course, we were lamenting that, a certain aspect of life, and architecture and the built city, whatever, is being lost or would be lost in future, right? But I think that was a kind of predictable lament. You know what I mean? Because everything changes, right?
Hmm.
But I think in 30 years, I think uh, when I now look back, I don't think at 30 years back we could have predicted that this would be the quantum of change. You know what I mean? And I think
Right, right, right.
that I think is what really hits you. You know, so when I one of the reasons why I think the idea of photographing this new infrastructure in the city. I mean, I kind of realized that, I mean, amongst all the other things that I was doing, the various
Hmm.
ideas that I was doing, photographing the city, blah blah, there was a certain kind of urgency which I felt
Hmm.
uh, in photographing this transforming physical city. You know, I don't think there is too much of uh, work being done by photographers to document the physical city. I mean, I shouldn't be saying document. I'm saying to photograph the
Just
physical
simply
city.
photograph. Yeah.
I don't think that is being done. I think that is so crucial. I mean, you know, it's staggering how much Bombay has changed. You know, so I think, I mean, I don't know if there's been any learnings as such, but I think this has been the great realization, and I think it's been a hard realization. You know, it's been a tough realization to kind of. Uh, I don't. I mean, you kind of thought, you know, some things would be gone. There would be lots of things I would hold on to. You know, the way we think. I mean, I don't know, in another 10 years what would be left for us to hold on to, you know, from what I remember and things like that. I think a lot of it would be left in my photographs. I don't think much would be left
It
in the.
still is, right? Isn't it? A lot of things, especially not just the clocks. So, Chirudeep, we were discussing.
I mean, sorry to interrupt. The thing, I mean, you know, so I also find that a lot of these things, uh, you know, have become like sort of like time capsules. You know what I
Right.
mean?
Mm-hmm.
So it could be, so the clocks for sure. I mean, you know, I mean, they just happen to kind of linger on. I mean, you know, just because they're kind of difficult to break down or whatever, perhaps. I mean, uh, you know, and it's a lot of them which are residential. I'm sure a lot of them would be gone. You know, redevelopment would happen and all of that. So I think, I mean, you realize that so much of it, like, you know, say, even if it is, say, something like, you know, 1 rupee entrepreneur, which was really about technology, you know, which was you know, these coin operated payphones which you were seeing around you at
Yes,
one point,
yes, yes.
you know, which you don't see anymore. But so I think, I mean, in that sense, I mean, you realize that, you know, those are things which, say, 20 years down the line, 30 years down the line, no one's
Hmm.
going to remember it. I mean, you know, I mean, it'll probably pop up in some of these, like we see now on social media. You see, like, you know, old gramophone records and people kind of getting very nostalgic about it. Maybe it would pop up in things like that. But I think those were important for me in terms of my lived experience of the city. You know, uh, I don't think I set out to kind of document, you know. And so I'm saying, I'm not documenting, I'm kind of really photographing the city. Documenting would be like a sort of more, uh, you know, you don't miss out anything, you photograph, like, for instance, if, you know, if I'm photographing the infrastructure changes that are happening
Hmm.
in Bombay, I mean, I don't think I could or I should have left out any of the projects, you know.
Hmm.
But since I'm not out there to document, but I'm kind of photographing, so I'm kind of, you know. And I'm saying this is a difference that I think uh, we should kind of figure out when we are, how we use these terms and things like that. Yeah. So
So,
I may have digressed. So
so is it? Do both of you feel that when you were using the word Jane gentrification, and so archiving not just helps save and store and preserve memories and stories, but also help us. Sorry, one second. I think I lost the screen somewhere. Hello, can you see me?
Yeah,
Yeah.
we can
yes,
see
we can
you.
hear you.
Okay.
We can hear you.
Okay. Sorry. Yeah, I lost the screen somehow. Sorry. But shouldn't these archival work, like photographs or oral history recordings, be used by governments, whatever? I'm not just talking of Mumbai. I'm talking of anywhere in the world, to understand that maybe this was a certain way of life. We are talking about climate sensitive architecture that's coming up. Let's not just make high rises for the sake of it, but high rises which are in sync with the local environment, the climate changes that are happening. Aren't, aren't there a lot to learn from these kind of projects, and not individually, but for people? Or is it something that will be like a nice coffee table book, or in some social media post, or in some film somewhere will somebody will use these as a kind of a reference? What do you think?
My personal opinion here is, and it's my personal opinion, the reason why we've had this vibrant group of archivists and oral historians and photographers and documenters doing what they're doing is because the government is not doing what it's meant to do. Okay,
Exactly. Yeah.
which is to preserve your heritage. And I've traveled because of my work to different cities in Europe, so be it Athens or Edinburgh or even London, and I know that the policy makers there are taking heritage very seriously. So you know what Chirodeep was talking about, this rapid transformation of the city that you see in Bombay today is not happening in the big cities of the world, because they have preserved those neighborhoods in the way I know of Athens. When I remember going to Athens, and they what I was told is those buildings are brought down every 100 years, and the same building is brought up. So in order to ensure with the same kind
Wow.
of material, so as to ensure that the old Athens city remains what it was and represents what it used to for all those hundreds of years. And Athens has been destroyed in wars and fires, but they've so has London, so have other cities. In Edinburgh was destroyed in a massive fire, for instance, and they've managed to bring those cities up in the same scale, size, and nature, which our government is unfortunately not doing, because I feel our government is not far-sighted as they think they are, or they assume they are. When you're building a road into the sea, and when you know your cities are drowning, that is not called far-sightedness, that is called short-sightedness. And that is not rapid development, that is temporary development to support a generation, not generations. And that is the reason why we are seeing these number of archivists that have mushroomed, because they are doing the job that our government was supposed to do, which is to preserve this memory. And they do it through various ways, which is through photographs, through interviews, and that is why I say I encourage any kind of archiving that is happening, even social media archiving that is happening, because this is what we are going to have, because we don't have any support from, or government support, sponsorship, or say even scholarship to help continue the work we're doing. Most of us are doing it as out of pure passion. So I'm not making money out of my project. I'm sure Chirodeep, with the public clocks also it's just
Has,
been a
yeah.
pure passion project that you make time out of your daily work to do what you're doing. And it is hard to be an archivist or to be a documentarian, or an oral historian, and to explain people why you're doing what you're doing. We are doing what I'm doing currently is very little for social media. We just put posts there to draw attention to the work so that we get more interviewees. A
Right.
lot of it meant for, so we have a Citizens Archive of India takes care of our archive.
The
We have these interviews
database.
and photographs and the data with, in a library and digital library. And we hope someday scholars and researchers, academics who are interested in understanding neighborhood spaces will be able to dip into these interviews and study the story of a forgotten Bombay.
How sad it sounds, but true. Yes, Chirudeep.
It's very interesting. I mean, your question, which kind of actually triggered one of my pet peeves.
Hmm.
And I think, I mean, Jane and I may have spoken about it at some point, if I recall. Uh, for instance, I mean, when I began doing this work on, this kind of new infrastructure push in Bombay,
Hmm. Hmm.
uh, I was, I mean, subconsciously, I think, reminded of a certain kind of work that I grew up seeing. Okay, uh, like say the the works of a photographer, like say a Bernice Abbott, or like say a Margaret Bourke-White, or like say a Eugene Atget's work on Paris and things like that. And what's very interesting when you think about, or even some of the earliest examples, I mean, from the history of photography, what you realize actually is that, this uh, this governmental backing, or whatever we want to call it, this systemic
Systemic,
backing
yeah.
is a kind of an important thing. Like, for instance, there used to be something called as, the Farm Security Administration. Okay, and this had to do with uh, the depression that had happened in the United States, and this was a government body. Okay, and they had a battery of photographers, an army of photographers, uh, whom they employed and whom they sent out to photograph what was happening in America, and when the government was taking steps to tackle the depression, that was plaguing the country at that point. Now, those photographs, I mean, it was quite remarkable how many of the photographers in that group, all of them, and most of them at that time were like kind of unknown names, but they all went on to become very accomplished photographers and well-known names in the field. Similarly, when I look at, say, Bernice Abbott's work on New York, okay,
New
called New
York,
York
yes, of
Change.
course.
Okay,
Yes.
you realize that how uh, that work was actually. I mean, there is something called as, if I recall correctly, I think the City of New York Museum or something like that, where this work now sits. Okay, so the thing is, I mean, this work has been done. It is accessible. I mean, there was a vision which kind of pushed it forward and, made it happen. Uh, I mean, I look at what is happening in Bombay now. I mean,
Hmm.
I think it's tragic. I mean, like what Jane was also saying, that it becomes about personal initiative alone to
Hmm.
kind of go out and do this stuff. It's almost impossible to kind of, there could be other stuff that I also want to do, and I can't do all those. I mean, I often wish that there were younger photographers with whom I could work and who would be interested in going out and doing similar things, but I don't think photographing, the transforming city, there are various stories of that kind which need to be told. I don't think those are necessarily being told. And I think it's not possible for individuals to keep taking the initiative and doing it. I mean, there was a time when the newspapers allowed you to do it up to a point. I mean, what Jane was saying right in the beginning. I mean, it came with its own challenges and shackles and whatever, but you were still able to do it. You don't do those stories. I mean, at least photographers don't. I mean, so I think a systemic kind of support is most crucial. To be able to do work of a certain kind and depth and gravitas and stuff like that.
Yeah,
Sorry,
it's
that was
yeah, no,
triggered
it's
by
it's
Jane.
it's important because I mean, most of us are working in isolation, and most of us are trying in our own ways to save whatever is available. A lot has already been lost, right? Um, and it's not easy because sometimes, I mean, it's my understanding, I might be completely wrong, is that when we are trying to talk to people and trying to preserve what exists now, we realize a lot has been lost. We can't even get that information back because one generation or two generations have sort of they just don't exist anymore. So we don't. Sometimes there's a gap in the continuity. And yes, they definitely have to be systemic. There has to be some kind of a support. There has to be an initiative that we want to archive and we want to document because we want to learn from it. We don't want to repeat mistakes, and we want to create something which is more constructive, which is collaborative. Also, what both of you are trying to do, which we are also trying to do through Museum Memories project, is give a kind of a platform to an average human being who might just be forgotten in this, rush to uh, beautification of cities. That's a term we use a lot in India, right? Just remove a certain community because they are not pleasant enough and they don't fit into our concept of what a beautiful city should be. So just pick them up and throw them somewhere else, and then goes with them their narratives, their stories, their histories, their culture. And that is also happening at a global scale, right? Because with natural and man-made disasters, people are moving from one part of the world to another, and go with them, they carry the stories with them. Now, I feel a museum is not a physical space, and I've had arguments for this with a lot of people that every individual is a museum because we carry within ourselves the story of evolution, the story of humanity. So the more, as Jane, you were saying correctly, the more we share, thanks to social media, we are able to speak, at least record our or other people's stories in this manner. So maybe we could look at more collaborative platforms, where we all connect with each other. That is an important way. And the best thing is if we could connect to an education system or institutions that would invite this kind of a resource where their students can learn from, young people can learn from. Because most of these universities in India, at least, have people from all over the country staying there, rural, semi-rural, urban, semi-urban, and everything. So there's a lot to learn from, right? Instead of, I don't know. I mean, again, it might be just rambling that. But my concern is what happens to all these stories and all these recordings unless they are utilized. Otherwise, we just keep saving. Yes, Chirudeep.
Like for instance, I mean, one often wonders, we keep talking about photographing cities and things like that. This largely kind of is relegated to, like, say, the Bombay, the Calcutta, the Delhi, that kind of thing. I mean, one doesn't see, like, like I collect books on cities. Okay. Uh, I don't see enough, like for instance in photography, I don't see a photographer in, let's say, in Ludhiana documenting photographing Ludhiana, or somebody in, say,
Exactly.
Guwahati doing, so I think these narratives kind of get stuck only in these bigger, and I think it would be most crucial. uh, so I think all the stories that we hear from the hinterlands of India are always these dire stories. You know what I mean? Uh, all stories of change don't necessarily need to be bad stories, don't necessarily need to be, VP stories that, oh, this is lost, that is lost. Oh, you know what I'm saying? I mean, they can be like, I mean,
Lamentations.
sorry?
Not lamentations.
Yeah, they don't necessarily need to be, right? I mean,
Right.
but but the thing is, I don't think we are seeing too many of those stories from cities that are, you know, outside of these big
Metros.
metros,
Yeah.
sort of thing. And I think, I mean, that uh, I wish there was something that could be done to kind of, provoke those kind of stories out. And I'm talking largely from a photography point of view. Of course, I think it applies to all other spheres as well.
So, like you were,
Right.
sorry, Jane.
I just had what I was trying to say here is just to connect with what Chiro was saying. I feel that, with the kind of work Chiro does or other city photographers do, and because we have social media access today, I feel they set a great example for people across the country who access material or who follow Chiro to understand how to document cities. So a lot of the change happens in the big cities. Big cities can become great examples of how you can and the work you can do in, say, smaller towns and in smaller tier 2 tier 3 cities. So I don't feel everything is lost. I feel that, when more of us come out and talk about our work, and that is what we all do, and we don't shy away from talking, and that is what I love about the world of archiving. Like be it Chirodeep or be it you, Malvika, or say Achal Malhotra, whatever different kinds of archiving we do, everyone has their backs, has each other's back. And that is required for this world of oral histories, memories, photography, archives, the kind of stories we're building to help kind of create this continuum and ways in which other people can continue. Like I started doing the work I was doing because of the people I was seeing and interviewing. For instance, even Chiro, when I wasn't into oral history when I interviewed Chiro in 2019, for instance, when he was documenting public clocks. Neither was I an oral historian when I interviewed Achal Malhotra or Malvika Bhatia. When through their works, I understood why it was important for me to do what I was doing. And when it came to when you had a question about how can you preserve these stories and make them accessible, of course social media is one way, but I also write fiction. And like Cavell, for instance, the book Bombay Balcha was an extension of the work that I do. It actually was the one that informed my oral history project. But the next book that I'm writing it actually draws from my oral history. So I feel there are many ways in which we can bring these stories to life. For me, it is through fiction because it is more readable. Um, Fiction is enjoyed by a larger group of people who do not necessarily need to have an interest in oral history or archiving. And so there are ways in which we can keep our stories alive, and we just need to find the means and ways to do that. And and what is, like, Chiru was saying, everything is not about lamenting. And I don't think when we archive, we are lamenting. What we are doing is preserving, because the only way to move forward and to understand, how we need to move into the future, the best way to do that is to be able to understand our past. And if our past disappears more quickly than change happens, then we are not going to be able to catch up properly. And I think that is why we need to do the preservation that we should be doing, so that we move resiliently and with a great amount of knowledge and awareness of as keepers of, say, truths of our past, and as we go ahead in the future. It's like, our grandmothers would tell the stories about their life and how it was, and we so much of that we imbibe without realizing. And that is why we preserve, we do that so that we know what our city was like and who built our cities and why they built the cities the way they did. We then develop a greater appreciation for the city, even in all its ugliness and why it has become this way. We develop a great sense of appreciation for that when we understand our past.
It was interesting what in a previous question, when I think you were asking Jane about the about what it is like to be speaking to people. I mean, is it like an emotional ride? And I was kind of reminded of, I don't know what she said. I mean, about how people don't necessarily remember, or they forget, and think, and how you have to kind of get them to remember things and all that. It was interesting. I mean, it kind of reminded me of when I was photographing my ancestral village, and the Durga Puja that we have in
Yeah,
our
right,
family.
right.
I remember my father at one point kind of telling me, that was something that I shot for about 13, 14 years. I mean, and what was interesting is my father at one point kind of thought, what's this big fuss about photographing our family? So I remember him telling me, we are not Rabindranath Tagore's family. We are not Satyajit Ray's family. Why this fuss about our family? So
Right.
I don't. So it kind of reminded me of that. I mean, when Jane was saying that, I mean, how we don't actually attach so much of
Self-worth.
importance
Yeah.
to our own little individual stories. So I think it's just so crucial to be able to do these things, to be able to talk to people who think of themselves as insignificant in a way. And I kind of also saw this, for instance, say when I've been photographing these public clocks, very often, when I would say go to a building, uh, you know, say and try and talk to residents to say, oh, do you think you could tell me a little bit about this clock, or, take me into the room where the machine is, or things like that. Uh, Many of them would get really excited, because for them, I mean, it would suddenly be about, that, oh, somebody is paying attention to us, even if it is for something as weird as a building, as that because my building has a clock on it. It's not for any other reason, but for something as quirky as that. So I think, I mean, it's interesting how then people start opening up to you and telling you stories and stuff like that.
Yeah, you have to find that personal connect somewhere.
Yeah,
I,
because I mean, because end of the day, I mean, I mean, it's the people who make the city, right? I mean, it's
exactly.
not just the buildings. I
Very.
mean, these are not stories of buildings.
These are
These
stories
buildings
of
are
people
built by people. People live in these. I
living in
mean,
them.
so I mean, this is so even these, these stories of, like you mentioned, I think, those bags which are hanging out of people's
Hmm, hmm,
doors,
hmm.
or the abandoned helmets. But at the end of the day, those are just devices to be able to tell the stories of how people live in this city, or what they are going through, and there's just different mechanisms that one is using to kind of tell the story of the citizens of Bombay. So be it through the prism of technology, be it through something else, I mean, infrastructure, architecture, whatever it is. But I mean, the stories at the end of the day are about people.
So, Chirodeep, Jane is working on a book, her next book, apart from her other work, apart from the oral history. What is your next project?
my next project, well, I'm actually on the verge of finishing an utterly fascinating 6 months that I've spent at the Chhatrapati Shivaji Maharaj Vastu Sangrahalaya. I mean, the erstwhile Prince of Wales Museum, and another project that is in progress at the Asiatic Society. I mean, so what's interesting is that in the last 6 months, I've found myself uh, privy to the workings and the inner happenings of two of Bombay's big cultural institutions. I think now what we are doing with those projects, we'll figure as we go along. But hopefully people will get to see those very soon.
So these are photography of books and artifacts.
So at the Asiatic, I mean, what I'm photographing is a lot of their rare books, a lot of their artifacts. So it's essentially the treasures of the Asiatic Society, which most people don't know about. I mean, we hear about, that they have Dante's Inferno. I mean, we hear that, we don't know much else.
Wow.
Is there Dante's Inferno?
Sorry?
Is there Dante's Inferno there?
Yeah, there is. I held it in my hands.
Wow.
Yeah. So it's quite amazing. I mean, so I mean, I sort of get very excited by things like that. I mean, museums excite me, which follow me,
Yes.
So to be able to hang around the Prince of Wales Museum for 6 months, see how the people who work there work, and what they do. Absolutely incredible. And I think this is another thing about being a photographer, right? I mean, it's a matter of privilege when people allow you into their lives. I mean, I'm sure Jane would agree with that as well, that when she goes and is seeking an interview with somebody, I mean, it's such a privilege to be able, when people let you into their homes and when they let you into their lives, you know what I mean? So I think it therefore becomes even more important, that we do it with a kind of rigor. And I'm saying it even if I'm, say, photographing infrastructure, it's not about individual people here, but I'm saying it still requires you to kind of have that, because you still need to kind of I think do it well. You still need to, it's somebody's, right? It may not belong to any individual as such, but I think it's still important therefore to kind of acknowledge that privilege that we have been accorded as a photographer, as a historian, as an archivist or whatever, because people are giving us their time, their space, they're inviting us over. And so
we're coming to the end of our discussion, and some of the understandings, my understanding after hearing both of you, is that the work of an archivist, like in the form of a photographer or journalist or writer or through oral history, that the techniques that one uses to document is very important, because it's about human beings. It's not just about a building or about a particular set of utensils or something. It's about the people who made those buildings, who live in those buildings, whose stories are important. And Jane, you would know that very well, that a lot of archivists in the world are actually women. At least most of the oral history archives in India are led by women. So a lot of women's stories are also coming into the forefront, who were never considered important enough, that they would ever be interviewed or photographed. Even women photographers of the world are now getting a lot of acknowledgement. So it requires rigor, discipline, to be extremely sensitive and emotional, and to also be objective. Like, where do you stop? Where do you stop pushing a person to, just because we need this information. And hopefully we keep connecting more and more with each other and the different archives that exist in the world, and different systems, governments or even private, they take our work as more seriously to help understand where they can also learn from. And
Yeah, I think collaboration is really,
collaboration,
like
definitely.
Jane was saying. I think,
Yeah,
all of us kind of figuring out ways to
we are a
collaborate.
force to be, reckoned with.
Yeah.
And
It's a very small community right now, right?
but very
That it's a
small,
small
but very
community, and
important.
yeah, and I think that is why it's and though it is small, it's very vibrant, and I think we all understand the shortcomings, the challenges, and that also makes it and I think which is why we're constantly looking at ways in which we can work together so that we can help the other, and through their processes understand how we can build our own. So suppose if I want to collaborate with someone like Chirodeep, I understand how photography can supplement, say, an oral history in an oral history archive, for instance.
Right.
And yeah, I'm hoping that collaboration happens at a greater level and the governments get involved.
Government get involved. That's why, I mean,
Yeah,
not
yeah, yeah,
just center, district, state, at all levels, the government
yeah.
gets involved.
Hmm.
And then, like, UNESCO kind of organizations also take sort of give importance. Please keep sending your museum memories to us. Jane, your memory has been the one that's been most popular. And we will meet soon. We will visit a museum together. And thank you so much for taking out time
Thank
from
you.
your
Thank
extremely
you.
busy schedule, sharing your journeys. And for everybody who's been part of this discussion, do send us your memories to museummemoriesproject@gmail.com. Follow, like, and subscribe our YouTube channel and Instagram page and our website, themumeproject.com. Thank you. Bye. See
Thank
you.
Thank
you.
Have a
you.
lovely
Bye.
evening. Bye.
Bye.